This review of Star Trek Picard Episode 3, The End is the Beginning, contains full spoilers. I've also reviewed the first 2 episodes, including more general Star Trek discussion and theorising, so the link to the playlist is in the description if you haven't seen those and would like to. On with this episode. We begin with another recap, this time to 14 years ago, shortly after the Mars attack. We see a few brief clips of the attack itself, mainly the ships attacking, and then cut forward to Picard, who's just handed in his Starfleet resignation. He's also with the Black Lady he met in the desert shack at the end of the previous episode, and she's also in Starfleet at this time. Her name's Rafi, which by the standards of the show so far isn't all that bad. On the downside, she constantly refers to Picard by his forename initials, JL. Perhaps they're trying to saddle him with a daft name as well, so the others don't stand out as much. As she says it nearly every other sentence, they're really trying hard. It appears to me that Stewart has been de-aged for this scene, and I must say it's exceptionally well done. It's only because he looks so old again after the title sequence that I realised. They're also wearing another type of Starfleet uniform, one which looks better than the one in the show's present day, though there is still a sense that they were done a little cheaply. There's quite a gap at the back of the neck on them, which is where they clearly do up as well. As they're likely only appearing in flashbacks, this is forgivable, but they're certainly a cooler design than the other new ones in the show, that's for sure. Picard says all the synthetics are now banned and the remaining units are being dismantled. The blame for the attack is being put on a fatal code error in their operating system. They put the death in the blue screen of death, you could say. I've had the occasional computer crash claiming a fatal exception, but it clearly takes on a more literal meaning in the 24th century. It does raise again the question of who was flying those ships that attacked Mars. By the current logic we're given, they must either have been automated fighters which were part of the Martian defences, in which case it was always a hack waiting to happen by one of the Federation's enemies who's daring enough, or else they were available ships commandeered by synthetics who also presumably kamikaze them, just like F8's own suicide. The alternative is there's a load of synthetics who subsequently flew off and are still out there somewhere that no one's mentioned. My suspicion is that a change was made late on to the scenario to make more sense, but the CGI was already done, or else they just put attacking ships in anyway because it's more evocative for the audience than just the orbital platforms turning on the planet. This scene of course also comes at the moment where Starfleet has just called off the Romulan refugee rescue. Picard says they've given in to intolerance and fear, which is more of that ham-fisted imposing of a feeling onto the situation that's not particularly congruous with what is actually happening, but is clearly meant to make the audience solemnly shake our collective heads and mutter knowingly to ourselves, just like Brexit and Trump. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield wasn't so nearly on the nose, and that had people painted half black and half white. Anyway, presumably just for being Picard's known friend regarding this situation, Rafi then got fired as well, despite there surely being staff shortages now after tens of thousands of personnel were already lost in the Mars attack. This is why Rafi's living in the desert in a shack-cum-greenhouse then. It's all she has, and she's resentful of Picard for at least having a nice big chateau to move back to. She's also upset that he never popped by to apologise or see how she's doing all this time, and that's why she greeted him with a gun, and with that in mind he probably deserves shooting. If the show's determined to force parallels with our time, well here's one. Picard took in 2 Romulans to live with him, but didn't even check in with the friend who got canned thanks to being too closely associated with him. Telescopic philanthropy in action. It raises interesting questions about the state of the Federation economy now. The sanctimonious talk in First Contact about the acquisition of wealth no longer driving humanity, and so money being abolished is one thing, but it seems that with the massive material loss in the Mars attack, the post-scarcity utopian idea of the Federation must have taken a hit too, as resources were presumably channeled into rebuilding the fleet. Unless Starfleet not only sacked Rafi but made her persona non grata in the Federation, an economic downturn is the only reason I can think of for why she's been stuck enduring such a low quality of life in the implicitly socialist paradise that was the Earth that we've seen previously in the 24th century. Rafi's expository contribution is that she says she has concrete evidence that a high-ranking Starfleet official conspired with the Romulans for the attack on Mars to go ahead. As the Tal Shiar are being ruled out and only really exist in this show to be dismissed because nerdy people like me would question if they weren't mentioned, it must have been the Zhat Vash as I predicted in the previous video. We'll have to wait longer though to find out whether their motive matches my guess of them punishing their own people for dabbling in artificial intelligence. Back on the Borg cube, we see Hugh from iBorg again, though actually I didn't recognise him until Amazon Prime's X-Ray told me who he was. He talks to Soji about stuff, but I have to say this whole part is the least interesting. Even in late stage Voyager, when the Borg's currency was at its most debased, a Borg ship was always a sinister place to be, and sometimes outright horrifying, so while the initial rush of seeing it revealed in the first episode was effective, it's a little sad that it's now just a location where the less interesting stuff happens in each episode. Indeed, for all the production advancements and occasionally excellent CGI in this programme, the galaxy of Star Trek Picard feels tiny. That it's the third episode and we're still waiting for him to leave Earth, of course, plays the largest role in that, but the only other setting being this demystifying and bland Borg ship interior doesn't help the issue. Anyway, what we functionally learn is that only the de-assimilated Romulans seem to be a bit weird and crazy for some reason. The last ship this cube assimilated was Romulan, the only Romulans known to have been assimilated by the Borg, and then the cube crashed out of the collective altogether. This is learnt by Soji talking to a particular lady playing with some cards, a lady who is said to be the foremost expert on, and I quote, ancient Romulan myth. We also learn that all Romulan houses have a fake front door. I'm sure that's not a Christine Blasey Ford reference. This shows Brexit and or Trump references are nowhere near that subtle. Now this mention of supposed ancient Romulan myth is a little odd. Indeed, I'm not sure if it's ever been referenced in this show that Romulans are an offshoot of the Vulcans. By the time of Star Trek Picard, it could be as much as 2 millennia since the proto-Romulans left Vulcan, which is certainly long enough to be ancient and stories from the time to be mythical. But at the same time, for a species capable of interstellar travel to not record history accurately enough for things from a spacefaring time to become myths seems unlikely to me, and so these myths must refer to a time when they were still on Vulcan. My guess is still that there's something ancestral between them and the Vulcans related to the secret that the Zhat Vash are guarding. Maybe as well it's a unique reassertion of the Vulcan mental abilities that Romulans weren't previously known to possess, which made the Borg allergic to them and broke off the cube that the assimilated Romulans were on. Another idea is maybe the Romulan offshoots were originally engineered by the Vulcans or something like that, and the symmetry to the notion that the Romulans would then go on to build their own artificial intelligence is why the Zhat Vash are so against it. It's just guesswork at the moment, of course, but worth making a note of so I can see later if I got anything right. It can go with the predictions I made at the end of the last video, which are all still in play thanks to this episode not revealing much more. We meet Captain Rios, Rafi's recommendation to Picard for someone who has a ship. What he's getting in return we're not told. I suppose it must be wine. Rios has a secretive Starfleet history, so that's something. From what little is revealed, I'm curious to know more, but he does play things up on the I'm deep and complicated and brooding I am scale. He also has some eccentric emergency holograms. They're both played by the same actor as Rios, and that's eccentric very much in quotes, as one of them's more irritating than all 7 years of Neelix just in the span of a single scene. In the first, he's just healing a ludicrous and completely unexplained injury with an English accent. The hologram has the accent, I mean, not the injury. But in the second, he's bouncing around with an absurd Irish accent in an act that suggests he's mixed the script up with an audition for Mrs. Brown's Boys. A big surprise comes as the Zhat Vash mount a home invasion attempt on Chateau Picard, which his Romulan housekeepers fight off. Considering that these Zhat Vash doofuses are fully armoured and armed against a late middle-aged couple who look like they've just got back from the garden centre, a high level of suspension of disbelief is required for this one, particularly as each Zhat Vasher attacks individually one after the other rather than all at once. The fight choreography is excellent though. At least we didn't have old man Picard taking one out physically either. His attempt to whack one with his stick is promptly batted away. Anyway, Dr. Jurati shows up in the nick of time to shoot the last one. They tie one of them to a chair to interrogate him, and then he spews some mystery talk before spewing up some acid and dissolving himself somehow without making much of a mess of anything else. And then they go up to the ship where Rafi is. She's also coming along for her own reasons, but she says she's tracked down Bruce Maddox and he's now a wild-eyed boy on FreeCloud. When FreeCloud popped up on her computer display earlier, I assumed that was just the name of the 24th century Wi-Fi network or something. But it turns out this most un-Trek-like name is an actual place. Picard says engage, and finally, after 3 episodes, he's on a ship going somewhere with some people. The End is the Beginning is more of the same as Maps and Legends, except somehow we actually managed to learn even less than we did there. It establishes Rafi, who is bucking the show's trend by seeming to be an interesting original character, but beyond that you could probably leave this one out on a rewatch and have lost nothing. Taking this together with Maps and Legends, one really gets the impression that they had more episodes allocated to the show than they had story planned out that could fill it. Still, hopefully that's the end of the filler. After all, they're in space now. Surely something must happen now, right? Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it, do please like and share, and also leave me a comment letting me know your own thoughts or whether you agree or disagree. If you feel I deserve it, I'd be very grateful for the subscription so you can hear from me again. The link to the new Headhunters Media Discord server is in the description as well, if you fancy swinging by for a chat. This is Jonathan from Headhunters Media, and I hope I'll catch you again soon.